If you are looking for some biblical encouragement and practical strategies for doing all that God has called you to as the heartbeat of your family, or if you get a little miffed when someone asks, "Are you a homemaker or do you work?" As if women haven't been doing both since the beginning of civilization. Well, this episode is going to bring you rest and freedom, my friends. So listen in to episode number 102. Hey friend, do you desire to connect with God in real and tangible ways? Do you struggle with the reality that life just hasn't gone the way you imagined it would? Well, you have come to the right place and you're not alone. I'm Shelly Sneed, the host of Unperfect, and it's my weekly mission to inspire women like you and me to grow spiritually through authentic stories rooted in the truth of God's Word. Hope and probably some humor are coming up. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I am so pumped about my guest today because I'm here with Charity Gibson, who, among other things, is the author of one of the most practical and helpful books for moms that I have read in a long time, especially this year, entitled The Working Homemaker, Employed Christian Moms Desiring a Thriving Home Life. And there's so much to unpack there, which we're going to. We'll get into all of that great content in a minute. But welcome, Charity, to the Unperfect podcast.
Hi, Shelly. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited about our conversation. But before we jump into that, tell my listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, whatever you want to share with us.
Sure. Well, I am a mama. I've got 4 kiddos, and they range from, we're just in birthday season right now. So some of them have just had birthdays, and some of them shortly will. So I've got a recently turned 6-year-old, and then I've got a 7-year-old about to turn 8, 9-year-old about to turn 10, and 11-year-old about to turn 12.
Wow.
And yeah, so they're a lot of fun. I also am married, and my husband and I have been married for 17 and a half years. And then I'm also an English professor. So I've been teaching at the college that I actually was a student at, and now got to return as a teacher, which has been fun to be on the other side of the desk. And in my free time, I just enjoy writing and doing things like this. And it's just kind of a full but fun stage of life.
Awesome. Yeah, and my kids' ages, my kids are all 18 and older now, but a very similar age gap. So people are like, "Oh, y'all are crazy for having kids that, all these," but they really are like each other's best friends. Like, I loved that my kids, especially in their younger stages, they were just like this pack.
I agree that, they're able to do things together and be friends with each other, and it's really awesome.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, I want to jump into the things that you wrote about in your book, and I loved it for so many reasons. But I think one of the biggest ones is that I haven't really heard many people talk about this in Christian circles, and the way that you talk about it, like looking at working outside the home from a biblical perspective. I think you did such a beautiful job of uprooting some hurtful assumptions or stigmas maybe that are around this. And one of the things you say at the very beginning of the book is the premise of the book is acknowledging a limited resource, time. And that's something I think every mom can relate to, whether you're, that's why I think this book is good for anybody, no matter what you do. At home, outside of the home, we're all volunteering, right? We're doing all kind of stuff, but the truths and the mindsets and strategies that you have so beautifully laid out for us are just applicable to anybody with the role of mom, I think, in today's culture. But I was hoping as we start off, you might just talk a little bit about why we might need a new definition for that word homemaker, what that looks like, or your thoughts about that in real life.
Yeah, well, I do love going to the bookshelves and getting practical advice from other women, especially on topics about motherhood. And that is one thing that I found is trying to find biblically based resources that kind of blended these concepts of working outside the home, but still valuing and prioritizing what happens in the home there seemed to be something of a gap there, that the concept of being a homemaker typically is something that is connected with, well, you're not involved in outside employment. If you're a homemaker, then that is what you are doing full time, which is true. Women that are home full time, that are not pursuing outside employment, are absolutely homemakers. But I wanted to find how that could harmonize with my life as a worker, as a teacher as well. And I think no matter where you find yourself, time is a limited resource. There's so many tasks to do at home. There's so many tasks to do at work. And so, that idea that some of us are busier than others probably isn't the case, that we're all prioritizing and choosing what we do with our time, the things that we let take up those little minutes that turn into hours, that turn into days. And so for me, it was really thinking about, okay, you hear a lot about balance, especially if you're a working mom, kind of suggesting you have this scale and you have to lay things perfectly on each side so that the scales match up, or something's going to topple. But with prioritizing, and specifically prioritizing our family, sometimes that means thinking about harmonizing and not just balancing. Everything's always going to be a complete 50-50. And so that's really what I tried to explore in this book.
I love that. I love that. And I love what you talked about with what we're prioritizing, because I think that's so true. I know I hate it when my husband is very wise and will say, if I say I don't have time for that, he's like, well, you have time for what's important to you, right? But that really is true. I love how you said harmonizing instead of balancing, because there are some things we have to do. And then there are some things, okay, I can make choices about the things that are important to me and that I value. Another thing I love that you talked about is really knowing your why of why you're working, because you were talking about just wrestling with God about what he's uniquely called you to do. I'm going to read this quote. By the way, for my listeners, they know this, but I tend to decide how good a book is on how much I highlight it, and I pretty much highlighted your whole book. So
I'm a big believer in highlighting as well. That makes me happy.
Very colorful. I finally, halfway through, I was like, I'm just highlighting the whole thing. But one of the quotes you said, it's important for working mothers today to know why we are working. If you're working because you feel obligated as an empowered woman to do so, let me just remind you of something. You don't owe feminism a career. And I loved that, because I love your approach is just, I really want to make sure I'm doing what God has called me to do. And even within that, I think, I know in my own life, so many good things have become idols. And so the other things tend to fall off. I know when I was homeschooling, that became an idol, and God was kind of like, okay, I'm going to have to rip that one away, because you're putting all your efforts and your confidence in that instead of in me and uniquely what I've called you to do. So I just love that you are constantly throughout the book giving us that reminder to look at what are the choices that you have and what choice is God calling you to make.
Yeah, I think you're right, that the idea of what we're motivated by can move the language from something that is like an I have to do it this way to actually God gives me the element of choice here. And I did really realize, thinking about the language, that I noticed a lot of women, specifically who work outside of the home, you hear a lot of, I have to work.
Right.
And I even stumbled across a Christian website that said, if women have to work because their husbands are lazy or unemployed, right, or they sort of gave these caveats, then it's okay, sort of right, suggesting otherwise, if you find fulfillment in what you're doing, if you think that you are contributing, or whatever other reason, that's not a have to, suggesting that maybe that's not the right choice. And inadvertently, I think some women maybe feel that way about why they have to be home, kind of like, I have to because we can't find good childcare, or I have to because, and of course, I mean, some of those reasons, there's rationale there, but I found it really useful to say, actually, this is a choice that making. And as long as I'm seeking the Lord's will, we have this freedom to say what choices are productive for our family, or what choices seem to align with our giftings and our talents, and even a stage of life. Maybe it's not going to look the same at all stages.
Yeah, and you even mentioned that the verse Colossians 3:23, which is whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, which suggests that gift of choice that you talk about, which I love. And you talked about how even as moms, we can equally honor God whether we work or whether we stay at home. I think that's so important for people to hear, because I think some of us, well, I know I was raised in just context where, well, if women were working, it was because they had to, but but really the best thing is this. And I love just knowing that and being able to speak that life into some people, that God may have a calling on your life to do exactly what you're doing. And it's not because you have to, it's because you get to.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then you do such a great job throughout the book of saying, okay, so if this is where you are, then how do we make our home a place where we're building relationships, we're training our children, we're doing all the things, because that is a lot to hold at the same time. And there's a wonderful chapter in your book where you talk about allowing our husbands to co-parent and actively participate in the home and in household matters. And I found this so helpful and impactful. And one of the things being that I'm so bad at telling my husband what I would like done. I just want him to notice. And we're wired so differently that is never going to happen. But I just wondered if you could share a little bit about this area, maybe the need for redefining what those roles should include even in our homes.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we hear that word homemaker or homemaking, we typically connect that to femininity.
Right.
And certainly, I think that is something we as women are drawn to, this concept of being nurturers and cultivating what happens in our home. But I really am very strongly convinced that that is something that our husbands want to actually be involved in, and have a lot of leadership that they can bring in, not just in the spiritual training that happens at home, but in those practical, even mundane things that happen at home. And I do think that it can be easy for me, if my husband is being involved in those things, to still want to micromanage it.
Right.
You can unload the dishwasher if you put things in this spot, or let's share the grocery shopping duties, but you need to get exactly these brands and these amounts. And so that's still really not a partnership there. And so I have found freedom in saying, it might not always come as naturally for men to do some of the caregiving and housekeeping elements, but it can be cultivated, and it can be a way that extends their leadership in the home. And there's also statistics out there about when women are carrying such a heavy load at work and at home, not only is it affecting them mentally and emotionally, as well as physically, but oftentimes marriages suffer. So, a statistic that I found was that 70% of divorces are initiated by women. That
Wow.
and of course there's hypotheses as to why that is. Why are they initiating this? And sometimes there are toxic situations that are not healthy to stay in. But it also does seem that this lack of either support or lack of maybe a belief that it should be something can be shared is kind of pushing some women to a breaking point, or sort of like, okay, I need to make a change, and this is the only change that I see as viable.
Absolutely. And I do think, I think communication is so key in that. Again, what I mentioned earlier about I mean, I went for years assuming my husband would notice certain things I wanted him to do. But as we're able to talk about, this would be really helpful if you do this. And he, on the other hand, is free to say, this would be really helpful if you do this. Really, I think they're a lot more willing to be more active in those roles. We just kind of have to get out of our own head and communicate with them and let them know. I did love the illustration about the pillows that you gave in the book, because that is totally me. It's like, why can't my husband and my kids put these pillows so neatly, all these 6 pillows on the couch? That's like my biggest pet peeve. But then I'm like, no one cares about the pillows but me. So that was definitely an illustration that I could completely relate to.
Right. Thinking about the things that we're spending so much time and energy on in the home that maybe at the end of the day are not really what matters.
Yeah. One of my flaws is I would love for my home to look like Joanna Gaines lives there.
Me too.
But she doesn't. I just have to keep reminding myself she doesn't live here.
Right. Sometimes I wonder if she even lives there. Things are certainly tidied up, I'm sure, even in her pristine home. And everybody's home is lived in behind the scenes.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, that is so true. And I know one thing my husband used to do that was so helpful to me, because we went through probably a 6-year period where we homeschooled. And just, so by the evenings and the kids were not really old enough to be doing a lot of things. But I remember him just doing some of our read alouds. Like he read the whole Chronicles of Narnia series to the kids, and, lots of books he did like that, which is just, not only is he helping me, but he's nurturing and building relationships with the kids that might not necessarily be his natural bent, but that's given him an opportunity to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Reading together is a great way to bond.
Yeah. So we know that we moms are very busy people. And I thought it was fascinating too, because I was thinking, even if we're not a working mom, we're volunteering or we're homeschooling or we're busy doing a lot of things. But in the book, you mentioned that 71% of moms are employed, which kind of blew me away. And that's when I was like, why aren't there more books like this then? Because we've got to know how to do this.
Yeah, it is a big number. That number kind of surprised me as well, because I think some of us are in pockets, and I would say I'm kind of in one of those pockets where I do know a lot of moms who are not working. And so you can kind of feel like maybe feels like I'm one of the only ones, or at least in my immediate circle here. So, I'm sure it may or may not feel that way depending on, what the woman's circle is.
Sure.
And then there's just so many nuances. In that study, they didn't exactly break down, what does that mean, being in the workforce? Is that working from home with some sort of virtual job? Is that working part-time? Is that working seasonally? And so even these terms, what is it to be a working mom, or what is it to be a stay-at-home mom? If a stay-at-home mom is homeschooling, she's got a full-time focal point there. If she's maybe has an online Etsy business or something. So even these terms, can only take us so far. I think, every woman is working in some capacity. So even if they don't see themselves in that 71% in the workforce, they're certainly not sitting at home, putting their feet up and eating bonbons all day.
Right. So with us being so busy, and particularly for these working moms, talk to us about how we as moms have turned busyness into exceptionalism, into idols, and how we can protect that family time, especially after work and school and when everyone's home.
Well, I know for me personally, I do want to be a good example to my children. I want to model these characteristics of being a hard worker, of being dependable and reliable at my job. And so, as well as model that to my students. And so I think there is always going to be, that question of what else can I do? I'm meeting the job description, but what are the ways in which I can do more and go above and beyond? And to an extent, that's healthy, but I like to think about our time and our resources like a bucket of water. And you only have so much to pour out. And if you're pouring it all out in one place, there's nothing left to give elsewhere. And so I'm also trying to model that with my children and with my students, that how can we be healthy, not just in one area? How can we make sure that in these variety of ways that we have different hats that we're wearing, that we can see what's really going to have eternal value, and how we can make sure these roles are harmonizing. And so I do try to think about that in the things I say yes to and the things that I say no to. And then I also try to help walk my kids through that, because as they're getting older, there's more things that they have the opportunity to say yes to. And when I think about busyness, it's really not just for the parents, but it is family busyness. It's all the extracurriculars. It's all of the social activities. It's all of those, whether it's sports or church or things that are good things. But again, we only have so much water to pour out, and so it's a question of how do we do that well, so that no area is going to be this arid, dry patch of ground, but that we're able to distribute our time in ways that harmonize with one another.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love what you mentioned about what are we saying yes to? Because I remember going through a season where I was really needing to pull back. I was completely stressed out, and I was just working part-time at that time. But I remember my counselor saying to me, well, why do you feel like you need to do this certain thing? And I was like, well, because I'm the best one for the job. And I didn't mean that in a cocky way. I just meant, I know, I have these talents and giftings and this whatever. And he was like, it really doesn't matter if you're the best one for the job. Like, that's not even a reason to do it. There may be someone a little less qualified than you that God wants to build up. And that just really stuck out to me, because I think sometimes, even especially in the church, we get that volunteer. I think I grew up with that volunteer mentality. I need to be saying yes to everything. I need to be doing, and there's a point where it's, God never called me to make that yes. That was so I could get that pat on the back or whatever. And then just protecting our family schedules. I remember when we have one kid in particular. Now, I will make all the rest feel bad if I say he's the most athletic, but hopefully they know by now he's the most athletic. But he, like at a young age, people started asking him to do club sports, which all we knew about it was they pretty much take up every weekend. And we just knew that wasn't something as a family we could do. So, and I'm not putting down anyone who chooses to do that, but we just knew that wasn't something we could get into, especially at that young of an age, and still parent all of our kids well and protect our Sundays and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think I love what you said about modeling that for the kids, because I think we can get to places where our kids think if we're busy all the time, then we're healthy, instead of let's make some healthy no's so we have some margin and we have time together as a family. And like you said, for what you value, time for what's important.
Yeah, it really can be easy when we become busy to kind of get a high from that. And it can become kind of this addiction, like, okay, what's going on next? And I've even noticed that if we do have a temporary busy season, maybe around the holidays or a sports season where our weekends are more taken up, then when we build in that margin afterward, everybody's looking around a little bit bored. Like, what do we do with this time? And so, yeah, I really think it's a lifestyle. It's not just the activity or even the validation that maybe we're seeking for it, but it's, okay, what do we see as being the value of creativity and having unstructured time? Or what do we see the value of building these relationships in organic ways where we kind of just all have to be together in the same room for these spontaneous conversations to occur? Because when you're just constantly, for me, I get in just the very technical mode. We have to go from point A to point B, and then that becomes the whole focus, as opposed to really just being together should oftentimes, I think, really be the goal.
Absolutely. And some of our best memories are those spontaneous moments where we're all just hanging out and having conversations, and one of the kids will say the funniest thing. It really is special when you make time for things that aren't on the time schedule, I guess, is the way to say that. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, this is something I didn't plan on asking you. So I'm throwing you under the bus a little bit, but one of my favorite quotes in your book, I'm going to say that about all of them, but you write, I don't just want to keep the plates spinning. I want to set them down on the table and invite my family to eat something nourishing and warm together, even if it must be reheated, which I love that last phrase. But in that section, you're talking about how we have to create these boundaries and limitations because we have to embrace sacrifice in our lives, at home and at work. And I just wondered if you might talk for a minute about, you mentioned we're in this culture where women are taught you can have it all, which is really antithetical to how Jesus lived his life as a servant and sacrificing of himself. I'm just wondering, what are some ways we as moms have to make sacrifices, even when it comes to our jobs, to be able to be the homemakers that we want to be?
Yeah, I think that is really at the core of the message today for women is you can have it all. It's no longer saying you have to stay home or you have to choose this route. It's saying you can have everything. You can be superwoman.
Right.
Here's a manual of how to do that. And I find that very antithetical to the Christian life, which in any path that someone might be leading, it is about smallness. Oftentimes it's about sacrifice and seeing limitation as not only evidence of our humanity, but part of our sanctification. I loved once hearing a pastor say that even before Adam and Eve ever sinned and experienced the fall, they were still finite beings. They still had limitations because that's how humans were created. And so I think in our work, and I don't want to give a blueprint and say, these are the jobs you must have in order to be a good mom. I think it's going to vary from person to person. I know for me, doing something like pursuing administration or pursuing probably a job with a prestigious title would overextend me in terms of what in this season I'm able to give to my family. And yet the term that is often touted is you can have it all, just not all at once or just not all at the same time. But I do think there are certain opportunities I'm letting go by as I'm focusing on my family, and they might not be available anymore once my kids leave home. I'm not going to be perhaps seen as the top candidate for whatever reason at that point. And I'm okay with that. I think that I'm still finding a lot of productive and meaningful things to do in my work, and I'm seeing it as the place where I should be. But it doesn't mean I have it all in terms of, have I climbed that ladder to the very top tier? And same thing with our families. I mean, I think that we have to recognize maybe we can't give our kids every opportunity. They can't be on every sports team. They can't be in every activity because, we are being picky. We're being choosy on purpose so that we're protecting that family time. I'm not able to give my all every night in what I'm cooking for dinner. Sometimes it's grilled cheese and tomato soup. It's not, it's not this 3-course meal. And I don't see that as taking a shortcut, but I think it's seeing as simplicity is okay. And we don't have it all, but we have the things that are life-giving for us.
Absolutely. Charity shared so many powerful truths with us today and gave us somewhat of a new and more biblical lens through which to see our work. And she has a lot more to share in episode number 103. You don't want to miss it. So if you'll go ahead and click on follow for this podcast, you can catch it the moment it airs. But as we close today, I am giving you some homework. But don't worry, I will not be grading it. Nobody got time for that. But here is the first thing I want you to do. Take a time inventory on all that owns a piece of you, and then compare it to what you value most and want to prioritize most in your home. So if you're like me, some tweaks, some changes are probably going to need to be made because as Charity shared, we can't do it all, especially at once. That is just a myth. So let's let go of what needs to go. And then second, if you're married, what are some things that you can ask your husband to do that would not only greatly help lessen your workload, but it also might give him some extra quality nurturing time with the kids, or at least give them a model of this type of load sharing, co-parenting that Charity talked about. And then have the conversation, and feel free to ask him to reciprocate the question. If you're not married, and I know some of you are working and homemaking all by yourself, I just want to say, who is someone you could ask for help? Someone who might drive your kids to a practice, or watch them for an afternoon, or pick them up from school in an afternoon that you've got to work late. I'm just making up stuff here because I honestly don't know what it's like to be in your shoes or what you need, but God does. And He's not only sufficient for you, but I believe He wants His body, His church, to partner with Him to provide you with everything you need. So the second thing there was ask for help. And third, make an intentional effort to set that unrealistic standard aside for quality time with your family. Like maybe instead of making pasta from scratch tonight, does anybody do that actually? I don't know. I don't. But whatever. Instead of a fancy meal, heat up some leftovers or make it a baked potato night. Give yourself permission to do simple so that you can focus on the relationships part of homemaking. All right, y'all, so go grab the book. The link's in the show notes. There's so much there you're going to love and you're going to want to hang on to for reference. And think of one person right now who could use the message of this podcast and send them the link. If you can't figure out how to do it, ask a teenager, y'all, because they have got this tech thing down, whether we like it or not. As always, I'm praying that you are able to see glimpses of God's glory in the now and the not yet of your unperfect life and home this week. I'll see you next time.